here's the counter. So we're live. All right. Episode 47, as always, on the Herpetoculture Network. And it's Ron St Pierre. I put in the little blurb that goes on Facebook and YouTube and stuff, a short thing about some of the stuff you're working with right now. But I have heard you do quite a few interviews, talk about all kinds of stuff, tons of history in herpetoculture and importers and all kinds of things. And you've been involved in a ton of parts of herpetoculture. But what I think is, it's funny, like hearing you tell stories and stuff. It's funny and it's cool the way that you talk. Like, do you know that you're Ron St. Pierre? Like, it's a thing. Like if you came up in herpetoculture at my age, like you're one of those guys. And then when I hear you talk, no pretentious, none of that. You have none of that, or it doesn't come across of that, like the ego part of it. But you've been instrumental in all sorts of things in herpetoculture, and even now with the giant anoles and things that I wanted to speak to you about. Like it seems like the next cool thing. It's going to be a really big deal and morphs, and it looks awesome. And you are right there. Like, is that ever, you know what I mean? Like, is that not like, wow.
Well, I mean, all right. First of all, thanks. I appreciate it. I mean, when I was younger, it's both been a blessing and a curse for me because I got involved in this pretty early. I mean, I was, like 17, 18 years old when I started doing this seriously. So and that was like 1985, 86. And, I don't really know how to explain it, but part of it was my personality. If I get into something, I throw everything into it, and I do this with everything. And so when I decided this was something I was going to seriously do, I threw everything I had into it, which for me is a lot of research. I'm a big, at the time it was books. Now, it's obviously digital media and stuff, but so I read a ton of books and a lot of stuff, and I was able to make, I was never satisfied just like mimicking what other people were doing. I always kind of wanted to cut my own path, and that comes with when you're successful, you make a name for yourself. And for me, I made a name for myself pretty young, and it's really not a good thing. And so, by the time I was in my mid 20s, my ego could fill a cargo ship. I mean, it was pretty bad. I had, and actually I had a tough time with it. Because, everywhere I would go, people knew who I was, and, it's in the reptile industry, not sure, obviously in the general public, but, so it was, I don't know. It really went to my head for a while. And then eventually it fell on top of me in like 2004. And then I realized, you're just, there's nothing special about it. This is all, whatever. It took the wind right out of me, and it taught me a valuable lesson in that, we're all basically the same, and nothing you do really makes you any different or special depending on what you do. It's just I'm having a hard time putting it into words. But anyway, when constantly lots of people are coming to you and telling you, oh, you're this, you're that, you did all this great stuff, it does have a negative impact on you. It has a positive impact too. It opened a lot of doors for me that would not have been open otherwise, and it has continued to this day. But it did that whole ego thing. It was bad for me. I was totally. I'm not even going to say it because I can't refer to myself in a G-rated show the way I would normally. But yeah, I was totally out of my mind, and then I got a wake-up call in 2004. It knocked me off my feet, and I then plunged into philosophy and stuff like that to try to fix myself and come to terms with everything. And so I learned a lot of stuff. And actually, it's made me a lot better at what I do now because I apply a lot of those things that I learned during that process. which I've been able to translate to how we, think about keeping reptiles, how we think about going forward, and all that stuff. So I don't know. I don't know where I'm going with it, man. It was just, I appreciate the sentiment. I get that from people, and I really do appreciate it. It means a lot to me. But I'm absolutely no different than anybody else. There's nothing special about me, and I've made way more mistakes than probably people will ever attribute. I've had far more failures than successes, and I actually appreciate those failures more because those things I actually learned stuff from. Everything I ever did that was successful, I really didn't learn much. But the really bad stuff that happened taught me a lot. So it made me better at what I do, I think.
But I think, man, like, I think that's just it. Like that. Every time I've ever heard you talk about reptiles, obviously at this later stage in life, like you're very introspective in that way. And I don't know. I mean, you kind of have to get kicked in the teeth to develop that. I think it would be very rare for a person to be born. I'd like to know the philosophy of why I act this way and why I feel this way and to develop those things. And so I think that makes sense. Something happened and it forced you to develop this way of thinking. And then now to see it quite a bit after the event and how you've come around to that, like, I don't know. It almost seems like it would have to happen that way, but I don't know. I still think it's interesting that you feel as though you're just another guy, you keep lizards and snakes and do the same things that we do. But there are a very few people who are like yourself in herpetoculture that seem to, when you talk about successes and failures, like talking about Tegus or Boas or monitor collection, Anoles, blue tongue, like making those choices and what influences your choices, which I've heard you talk quite a bit, of course, is keeping outdoors and how you keep things has a big influence on your choices right now. But they all seem to resonate, and like Tegus, political things aside, can be fantastic. Like when I think of Tegus, I think about you and Bert, and you keep these, they're like, cat-sized lizards, and Bert's out there throwing pies at him and stuff, and you're talking about morphs and keeping things outside and all these different things, and it worked great. And then you think about boas, and it's like, I mean, boas are what people want pets to be for pet snakes, because when it's a little pencil that's alive, kids lose them. Boas sit with you and do these things, and then there's red ones, and then there's like, it's these little key things that keep recurring. Blue tongues are amazing. Turns out there's a bunch of morphs. When they put albino and different things in them, they look ridiculous. Nobody cared about anoles till there's giant blue ones and really cool morphs and like all these different things. And it's like the decision making to, I don't know, man, you just always seem to be there like, oh, that's cool. But if there was this little tweak, and it's like, oh, the little tweak guy, that's this guy. He knew this thing, or anoles. What if they were huge or blue, or, and I don't know. I just think it's very interesting that to hear you talk about your choices are very much based in your style of keeping, but then a lot of things that interest you or that you work with or that you do have success with parlays out into bigger herpetoculture where most people don't keep the way that you keep, but that stuff still ends up working and being cool or being popular and things like that. That's just a very interesting transition, that your choice of things would be based so hardcore in your style of keeping, and then also still play into the mainstream keeping so well in your successful arenas. I don't know. That's a very strange part of herpetoculture that you fill because you keep outdoors and do things so very specifically for your setup.
Yeah, I mean it, and what you basically described is that's why I do this. I mean, honestly, if I wanted, so I make a living off of this, but I've never really made a lot of money on this because generally I develop stuff, and then right around the time where you can really start cashing in on it, okay, I'm done with it. I've developed it. Now it's out there, and get it out of here so I can get on to the next thing. And I've done this my whole life. So as a result, I never really profited that much. I do, enough to get by, but development of these new things, which is really the only stuff that really interests me, it's less about the specific animal and it's more about, developing a system first for myself to be able to propagate them outside. And then I also work on developing the indoor protocols for them so that I can relay it to customers and other people so that they can be successful. And then people keep spreading it around. And eventually, you have stuff, like you said, it becomes a main part of herpetoculture. I don't keep, like, if I discover something, I never keep that to myself. I immediately put it out there. And if it works for some people, if somebody takes it and runs with it and it works for them, that's great. That's what I want. I don't really keep it for myself and think, if I hoarded these now and I could corner the market and be the only one. I just don't care enough about that whole business side of things. And it's because it doesn't interest me. I mean, I don't get me wrong. I like getting paid. I like having a roof over my head and being able to eat what I want when you know what I mean, and stuff like that. But yeah, as a result, though, so we make some sacrifices with the way we live to be able to take the risks to do like that. Anole thing was pretty risky in the beginning, and initially I passed on it in 2013 when the first albino was caught. They sent me a photo of it, and I was like, yeah, I'm not interested in that thing, and I totally passed on it. But I thought it was interesting enough that I took the photo and I threw it up on Facebook and said, hey, look what was just caught down in South Florida. And man, my phone blew up. And I mean, I was like, and then when I was looking at the people, the type of people that were messaging me about it, it was all other industry people that were very interested in this. A lot of professional breeders, professional herpetoculturists. They were like, what is that? How can I get it? And when I saw that, I was like, maybe this thing has some legs. So I immediately called the guy back, got my car, grabbed the money that he wanted for it, ran all the way down to Miami and picked it up. And that's what kind of got that whole Anole thing started. Because I've had a relationship with that giant Anole for 40 years. I used to commercially collect them as a kid when I lived in Miami. Because
just by the nature of where you live. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And they used to be a big common pet item at the time. So every year you can basically kind of harvest them in the city. And I used to catch around 5,000 to 7,000 of them a year and sell them to, all the wholesalers.
That's crazy.
Yeah. And this was all like in my neighborhood, just riding my bike around the block and pulling them right off of the people's fences and trees. And they're everywhere in Miami. So, and then when I was older and I had a car, I had a route that I would drive, and then I wouldn't even get out of the car. I would pull right up to the tree. I had a noose, like a fishing pole with a noose on the end that I could slide out the door. It was collapsible. So it collapsed down to 18 inches, but extended to 8 feet. So I could just slide it out the window of my truck, noose the Anole, pull it in the car, put it in a bag, drive to the next tree, do it over. So I had a pretty good system. And that's actually how I was able to buy and build my breeding stuff. It was initially funded on the back of those giant Anoles. So I know that animal well. And so when that's, I guess, one of the reasons why I was offered that first one. So then anyway, that started it. So I went down and got that one and brought it back, and it was almost dead when I got it. The guy that had it just kept it in a dirty McDonald's bag, and it was clinging to life when I picked it up. But I actually stopped at a fast food place on the way home because it was like a 4-hour drive. And I went inside, put the Anole under the faucet, got a little water into it. And then it started looking a little bit better. And then a couple of days later, it was pretty good. And that's the one that started it all.
Wow.
So, but it almost didn't happen. And then that just kind of snowballed. I was like, oh, these are actually pretty cool once you know, get them, at least captive raised from babies, and they're tame
Right.
for the most part. I mean, when you keep them outside, they're not really too tame. The albinos are pretty mellow, but the Podior and stuff, the ones that are outdoors are just typical aggressive. When you bring them inside, though, it's so weird. As soon as you put them inside under, like UV bulbs and stuff, they
Mhm.
mellow out and they're a totally different animal. When you put them outside in the sun, whole different game.
Right.
So,
Yeah, because
yeah, I
so
mean,
many of your pictures, I mean, I'm sure that's probably picture number 700 of getting it to sit still, but that, I mean, they're relatively relaxed, especially considering it's an Anole species, very large, sitting in the
oh yeah,
hand, like they look fairly chill. I mean, it's,
yeah.
I,
I mean, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
no, no, I just did. I think that initially probably was a big spark for a lot of people, just seeing that of, it's not a
Yeah,
night anole with teeth out ready to go.
right.
It's beautiful. It had a few different species, which very few people probably even realized there was that
Right.
diversity of species. And
Yep.
then those two things aside, it turns out there's morphs, and then now it's just sitting in someone's hand. That really blew up across social media for herpetoculture, for a variety of reasons, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, they seem to be, it seems to be picking up momentum. Next year we'll probably prove out around 5 different morphs of the one species of the equestris, the one that's found in Miami.
Mm.
And then we have the Podior, which are the subspecies that have the blue and yellow that everybody oohs and ahs over when they see them. And but yeah, I mean so I feel like the outdoor system is well developed. It's been working now. It's working. It's working like the machine I had intended. Now I can reliably produce them outdoors with very little issues, and I'm relatively happy with it. Now we're working on phase 2, which is we just ordered a whole bunch of these large indoor terrarium style. These are custom ones though, because I want them a specific size, but they're
Okay.
basically like Exoterra front opening kind of things, but these
Sure.
are 36 inches high, but 22 inches long and 17 inches wide. I wanted them to fit
Oh, okay.
exactly on a baker's rack, two side by side, perfectly. So this guy that I know builds
Oh.
them, and so anyway, the first wave, which is 40 of these giant tanks, will be here next week, and
Oh,
that's the
okay.
start of the indoor setup. So I even have, I have my good friend is, I know him as the guy Eddie Soto, who lives down the road from me. He's another
Absolutely.
lizard breeder. He and I are, he's tight, and he's out here all the time, but he helps me with that kind of stuff. So me and him are gonna get them inside this building and get them set up, and then Heather will come in and do all the husbandry stuff, and it should be pretty good. I'm expecting when we're done with this, we'll have a full, basically kind of a good set of parameters for to be successful with them indoors without a lot of excess cost and all that, because that's I try to keep things simple but also effective. Like I don't have anything against the racks and the boxes and all that stuff. I don't have any problem with it. I do have some of that equipment. I do use it myself for certain things on occasion, but I just prefer that when I'm working with stuff, I like having them in like bigger enclosures that are more interact, that you can see them better. I don't like to come in. The only way I can see it is to really slide open a opaque container. I like it clear.
Mhm.
So I'm kind of trying to keep that in mind. It'll basically be how I do it. I have no doubt though that someone at some point will figure out that you can breed these like they do crested geckos in like the larger boxes. I have no doubt someone will do it and we'll be successful, and I'll have gone to all this for this extra these extra steps for no other reason than for my own benefit. But I don't know. I'm stoked about it. I'm still enjoying it. and I think it's got a bright future. Um, so I worked on it for 10 years now.
Right.
So it's just finally starting to, that's another thing, man. People don't, it takes a long time to develop new stuff. Like you can't just go and buy two and throw them together and, like you can nowadays with a lot of things that people 20, 30 years ago long developed, like crested geckos. I mean,
Definitely.
they're a big success story.
So what,
Yeah.
what pushed you to expand it inside like that and go with the building? Is it just trying to do the colony thing and set up the numbers, or are you trying to establish how you want it done inside versus out, or what pushed you to that
It's a couple
direction?
things. One, a nice indoor setup will allow Heather to take good photos, good videos, interacting. It's
Okay.
difficult
Yeah.
to do that outdoors. Like I said, as soon as they're outdoors and they're heated up, they're a different animal. They're harder to work with. Once you put, as soon as you can take them outdoors, though, put them inside, and within a day or two, they're totally different. It's strange. I mean, I realize that this is a common phenomenon, especially with lizards, but it's weird how different they are just from one. I mean, literally, I'm talking about moving them a distance of like 6 or 8 feet, and it totally changes.
Yeah.
So, so that's one of the reasons. The other reason is that, again, we get a lot of questions about them. There's not a lot of information out there about anoles in general. And right now, I'm just trying to find a basic, setup that works well for me, that I can then say, okay, hey, look, this is how I'm doing them indoors. This works. And it doesn't work on like a single tank or 10 tanks. It works on 40 tanks,
Okay.
so these 40 enclosures, it's a nice wide spread of, you know, um, incoming data of how it works and all that. So that's kind of it. The other thing is I may try to run an outdoor system where they breed, not standard season. Like for them, it's usually spring to early fall, and then maybe run a concurrent indoor system where I have them reversed and they're breeding in this wintertime. So
Okay.
it's another thing that I'm considering. It's just really going to depend on how popular they become. If they become super, super popular and sales are really through the roof, then we may run a concurrent thing and try that, rather than have them all born at the same time and have, a ton of them, spread them out throughout the year and just have a nice, small, reliable supply that when somebody wants one, yep, we got, 10 of them to choose from here. And so that's kind of the way we're looking at it. And we're simultaneously developing a fairly large scale frill dragon thing, because Heather really had an interest in them, and some came up. They were good captive bred ones, so we bought a bunch of them, and now I'm kind of working on an outdoor setup for those, and then eventually, So yeah, I mean, there's not a lot of people that produce them. Most of them are imports still to this day.
Yeah.
So I think it's a good. I mean, I bred them in the 90s for a few years. So they're relatively easy, and they're really well suited for like the Florida climate. Like we have a good environment here for them, other than having to shore them up a little bit for when it's cold.
Right.
Otherwise, the weather conditions here are great. So that's like I said, I like doing stuff that is challenging.
So for something like that, where new project, new idea, hey, we're going to try this out and see what we want to do. Now, have you just built over time to where you had enclosures that you were going to use for that? Did you, hey, I'm interested in this project, and it's like, okay, well, we got to make a Home Depot run because I got a bunch of stuff to put together now, or is it kind of cart before the horse kind of thing, or how do you deal with that? Because you don't ever seem to get a few, you get a truckload. It's
right.
It's not a few animals to set up.
Yeah. Well, actually, it's about twice a year we have to get a dumpster delivered so that we can get rid of the failed systems or experiments that I've attempted.
Okay.
So we go through a lot of different systems so basically we're just constantly iterating. And a lot of times I'll build something I'll think will be great. And then I'll be like, oh man, this sucks, and trash it all and start over. And so back and forth like that. We have a lot of enclosures sitting around that are like, basic stuff that'll work while I try to develop a thing. But normally it will be, it'll take months. Heather and I will sit there and kind of bang our heads together as to try to find, because she'll notice things that I won't notice. So between the two of us, we've come up with some pretty much better systems than anything I ever did on my own previously. Because she's more of a husbandry specialist. So she catches this. She's like, oh, well, this will be problematic, at feeding, or this will be problematic for watering, or this will be problematic, so all these things that I may not necessarily catch. And then I'm like, so I got to, kind of redo it and tinker around with it. So we just got through doing one for blue tongues that I'm really happy with. It's got a subfloor that go down underneath. It's loosely modified off of the one I use for Varanids. But the frilled one, I actually have no idea. Right now they're in, these giant, the DIY screen cages that Alec Feldman builds. So right now I've got them in those because they're all small still. But we got those and they're really good. I like those. They're not suitable for permanent outdoors here because of predators and stuff like that can tear into them. So I have to come up with a design. And then there's cage placement. See, there's all these things that go into outdoor stuff. I get asked about that a lot. A lot of people will call me up and say, hey, I see you keep stuff outdoors. I want to put my whatever lizard outside. And I always have to rein them back in and say, well, hold on. It's just not that simple. The only real benefit that I get from having stuff outside, besides, the animals get their benefit of like natural sunlight and natural rain and stuff like that. But the benefit that I get out of it is that I don't have to clean cages. As long as they're on the ground, there's small numbers in a large enclosure. The nature takes care of it. It's totally bioactive. So I really like that. And that allows me and Heather to keep more lizards than we could if we had them indoors. If we had them inside where they had to be cleaned and maintained constantly, then, we'd either have to have employees or wouldn't be able to keep as many as we do. So that's the benefit I get. The downside of it is that you're at the mercy of whatever weather conditions, which are constantly changing. There's things that go into like enclosure placement that, recently a couple years ago, I built a giant monitor enclosure right outside of the back of my house. It's 60 feet long and 8 feet wide and divided into 10 sections. And I thought that I put it in a great spot where they could get sunlight throughout the year, optimal sunlight. And I miscalculated where the sun would be in December. And so it renders an entire, maybe a quarter of it is completely useless in the wintertime because there's a giant oak tree that blocks 100% of the shade. So I have this massive unmovable enclosure that was a very costly mistake. And now I have this unusable end. And the last 2 or 3 enclosures just are not usable for anything because a significant portion of the year they're shaded all the time. So those kind of things happen. So normally what I do is if we plan it a year ahead.
Accidentally killed your neighbor's oak tree yet, or what?
No, it's our oak tree, but it's like 80 feet tall and it's probably, hundreds of years old. And yeah. And it's also hanging over the house at the same point. So really that's not something that's ever going to get trimmed.
Right.
No, but, so that kind of, that sucked, but that was my fault. I miscalculated. But normally what I do is if we plan something out, like what we're doing with the frills, I have about, 8 or 10 months. So I'm walking around now and looking at what the sun is like at different spots. I pick a few spots. This is where we should do it. Maybe over here. And then we just kind of keep an eye on the sun pattern and, but that's like something that has to be considered. If you put your enclosure, like I know a guy that bought some white throat monitors from me, grew them up, couldn't get them to breed. He would just constantly complain. He's like, "Hey, don't do anything. They're not breeding." So one day I went over to his house and he had him up against the 6-foot privacy fence and it was totally shaded. And I'm like, "Dude, how much sun do they get?" And he's like, "Well, they get sun." Yeah. I'm like, "Okay, how much?" "Well, in the morning." I'm like, "Yeah, well, that's
Right.
why they're not doing anything. You need to bake these things." So I told him, "Hey, move it over to this spot. It's south facing and it's in the middle of the yard. It should." So he did. And within a year he was producing them. So
For sure.
yeah, it's just stuff like that, not to mention if it's too shady, you can outright kill some species. They'll get
Right.
respiratory and all that. So there's all that, hurricanes and periods of long rain and cold, but I know how to do it.
Yeah.
So
on the monitor front, I had heard you talk before. Are you transitioning with the monitors? You're sticking with the monitors because you have, it's like everybody's best, awesomest monitors ever are somehow end up coming across your collection.
right.
And then, I mean, lace and just all the coolest monitors. And that's or what seems like such a huge transition from the giant, awesome monitors. And then, we also have a bunch of blue tongues and I'm going to do frills and just very different, or what would seem to be very different things.
Well, actually we have Bell's eggs incubating an incubator, but other than that, there are no varanids on the property anymore. I sold 100%, the entire collection.
Okay.
For a couple reasons. One, I ended up in the hospital a few months ago. I had major hypertension. My blood pressure was 200 over 110 or something. And I had to make some lifestyle changes. But on top of that, during that event, I couldn't even be outside or I would turn white as a sheet for more than 15 or 20 minutes in the heat. So, and Heather can't handle those big monitors by herself. So those were lace monitors in particular were the thing I got into this for.
Mm-hmm.
So it sucked to get rid of them. But at the same point, at the time, I didn't know if what I had done to myself was reversible and
sure.
What it was going to be like. So I made the decision to go ahead and get rid of them so that way, they're not gonna lose any care because I'm down for, we didn't know how long.
Right.
And then on top of that, another thing that was pushing at me was the state that I live in is looking hard at all Varanus as a potential band to add with the Tegus and the other things. So I'm thinking,
okay,
well, maybe this is one of those knocks that tells you, hey, it's time to make some changes. And
right.
So I was like, all right. Together. Yeah. So, I mean, I'm cool with it. Like I said, I have eggs incubating. So if I decide, in 6 or 8 months, hey, I'd like to get back into them again, I can just raise a couple babies and just have, a pair. But at one point, like you're saying, I had, 40 big monitors here of like 5 species. So it was a lot. It's just, there's a lot of issues that go along with that, the just selling them and it's just easier this way. There's a lot. I don't like selling big monitors at all, anything beyond a baby, because it's very risky to ship out larger varanids because there's almost nothing that can contain them. I mean, we have these plastic boxes, those tough totes that you can put them in now. But if the airlines cracks one, and there's no bag that will hold them as soon as you put them in bags.
Then you're the guy that mailed a dragon and it's on CNN.
Yes. Right. So I'd like to avoid that. Right. So that was another reason. There was just a whole list of things. And then there's also the issue with the state is, well, what if God forbid one gets out, and a neighbor finds it. Right. And then, then what's going to happen? So there were all these things. And I was just like, you know what? I can't even go out there and enjoy them now. So let's just go ahead. So I made a few actually, I put a post up on Facebook that I was going to sell the whole collection. I mean, they were gone in minutes. So yeah,
Hey
so
man,
I'm
because you're Ron St. Pierre. I'm telling you. No, but so I would say though that because you've been in this for so long and because you do have the business and friend and social connections that you have, that has to provide a little bit of a peace of mind that you're not sending a bunch of monsters to people you just don't know on the internet type of thing. Like
right.
you have enough professional connections that you are aware of where these things are going and who the people are and so on and so
Oh
forth.
yeah, yeah. I mean, honestly, most of the people that I sell directly to are other industry people or professional herpetoculturists, or you know what I'm saying. I mean,
Sure.
I actually never. I can't remember the last time I ever had an ad anywhere for anything. You know, whether it was on Facebook or on. I mean, any of these places. I mean, we know we usually don't need it. You know, the people that come over here, you know, people like Eddie Soto and people like that, they come over and they're like, "Oh, you hatched that, and I want those," and then they buy them, and so or we have people that we will send to shows with our stuff that sell our stuff and then give us our
Sure.
cut and they keep their own. So we do a lot of stuff. Heather does sell as much as she can retail to the public, but retail sales require a lot of. I mean, the hours she spends on the phone with people is I wouldn't do it. if it was me, it would never happen because I've got World of Warcraft to play and and all that. So
I get it.
but I don't know, man. But that is my job security. That name is my security, and that
Right.
I mean that's worth so much to me that I can't even convey that. And I like very much to keep it that way. So I don't think there's anyone out there that could say that I screwed them in any way. If I sell somebody something and there's a problem, I always make up for it. Because I mean,
Right.
things happen, you send somebody something, maybe they're not happy, maybe it didn't make it, whatever. I will usually bite the bullet and make it good. I can't, I'd rather keep my reputation intact, keep everybody happy,
Yeah.
but if I mean, obviously there are scammers that try to shake you down, and I'm wise to that too. So,
Well, that's a longevity and experience thing as well, though. That might have worked the first 3, 4, 40 times. When you're on time 60 of the scam, like it's a little old.
yeah, well, I mean, dude, I grew up in a bad neighborhood that was full of that kind of stuff, and I myself got in a lot of trouble when I was a kid. So, I'm very street smart in that regard. So I can tell when somebody's sliding up on me sideways for something, and I think I'm pretty good at picking that out, which fortunately has almost never happened in the entire time I've been doing this. I mean, generally, people are pretty good. I mean, there's really not a lot of like really bad people out there. You just remember them.
Sure. Yeah,
So,
that makes sense.
it's because we're hardwired to do that. Anything that's, that bush is moving over there. I think there might be a saber-toothed tiger in there, but you'll remember
Yep.
that.
Yep.
So it's one of them things. But yeah, I mean,
So
it's
with with you having the building access and trying to develop things with the anoles and different things like that, because I would imagine, I don't know, but like you work with a lot of species that people would think would tend to be tropical, and just by dint of where you live and how you keep and so on and so forth, like it would, to me, if you ever woke up one day and were like, boy, Moroccan Uromastics are pretty cool, like
done
you'd
them.
kind of be out of luck on that front. But
No,
having
I've done them.
really,
Yeah. Yep.
so you,
Acanthoneurus. Yep.
but like did you do you felt like you struggled with arid species where you live, or was that just a better puzzle to have to solve, or how did that?
Well, actually, I tried a bunch of different Uromastics over the years. I was unsuccessful wildly unsuccessful with ornates, with Egypticus, with a couple other ones. But real Moroccan acanthonuris that I had gotten from Bert Langerwerf back in the 90s, those did really well. And you got to remember that Bert was also breeding them in central Alabama, which is, he's actually wetter than I am.
That's true. That's true.
So that species did really well. So, I mean, they're not all, cut from the same thing. I do think that if I really wanted to go to the trouble, I could probably pull it off with the more arid stuff here, because, I've learned things over the years. Basically, I was breeding bearded dragons since like the late 80s and outdoors in Florida, and Heather's been doing them for like 15 years, but indoors. So when we got together and I was like, look, we can do these outside and it'd be easier on you. It's, less, and you'll enjoy these more because you can go out there now and they're running around and being bearded dragons. And she was really nervous about it in the beginning. But she loves it now. Now she's always out there and playing around with it. And they're in these big enclosures and they run up to her and, wait for food, and, they bask and do all this stuff. But where was I going with that? But anyway, yeah, I mean, they're fairly arid species. So over the years, I had to develop ways to deal with, prolonged periods of rain. Rain is good for them, as long as it's not, a pervasive rain. Like if we'll have times here where it'll rain for a week,
right? That's
bad. So we just cover them. It's a simple fix. It's not a big deal. You just put some plastic over them and keep the rain out, and they're good. And it's the same. It works the same with cold. I've kept fairly tropical species outdoors year round without any supplemental heat at all, and just 6 mil plastic covering the enclosures. And those enclosures will get down to the 40s at night, sometimes in the upper 30s. But the caveat is I generally take a hide box and bury it under, 60 pounds of cypress mulch. So they can go into this box that's then on the ground itself. And then they're, a foot, 2 foot underneath cypress mulch, which itself, as it, decays, gives off some heat. And
sure.
I've temp gunned inside those enclosures only a couple times, but on like one night it was freezing. There was ice on the enclosures, and I opened up, went underneath the plastic and temp gunned in the box. And so it was below 32, but the inside of the box was still above. It was like 55.
Wow.
So, and that's fine. I mean, even in the tropics, it'll get in the 50s at night during, certain times of the year. I mean, I've seen freezes in the Brazilian Amazon. I think it was 2010. So, these things are not, cold is actually not really as much of a problem as heat is.
Right.
Like when we ship stuff, new people will all insist, in like fall, they'll insist that we heat pack those things. Let me tell you something. If we ship a shipment out and we heat pack it in, like, say, October, when it's still 90 degrees here during the day, even if the destination it's arriving at is 45 at night but 60 in the daytime, it's an incredible risk to those animals from here, to where they're going. And it's not on their end. It isn't because of the cold. That 50 or 60 degree cold that animal might experience in that box, which is very unlikely anyway. It's not like the receiving end is going to leave it sitting out in 45 degree temperature at 3 a.m. in the morning.
Right.
So, but taking it from when I drop it off at FedEx, how long is that box going to be in the sun till it gets to the plane? That's serious risk, and that's where problems. So it's just such a common thing. I mean, it literally happens all the time. People will order something in the fall or in the spring and insist on a heat pack because it's a little cool up there. And I'm like, there's just no way. So we've had to develop ways to combat that while making them feel like, they got what they wanted. But at the end of the day, I'm like, if I did what you're asking, this thing would be dead.
Right.
So that's a little bit annoying, but that's part of, I don't know where that comes from, to be honest. I think a lot of people just assume that reptiles are tropical. Like bearded dragons, where they live, they hibernate. It gets cold in significant portion of bearded dragon range.
Yeah.
They're hardwired. They're well equipped to handle the cold. Like I actually had mine outside underneath plastic, but we had an unusual cold front in 2009, I think it was. Got 17 degrees. 100% of them survived. Nobody died. Everybody was good. So so I got to believe that if it was 17 outside and it froze the pipes of my house, and this is in Florida, which doesn't really happen, it was an unusually brutal cold. So I have to believe that inside those hiding areas that it was still in the upper 30s.
Sure.
So they were fine. Everything survived. Monitor lizards.
Wow.
Tegus, obviously, they don't even care about that.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
But yeah, I mean, that is a common kind of misperception. But I don't know.
So something like Uromastyx is, I don't know, is that one of those things where do you look at that as, I don't know, I'm kind of trying to think about like decision-making process. Like, did you look at that as, I think Uromastyx are cool and I want to keep them, but the way I keep is like this, so I got to figure it out? Or did you look at it as keeping Uromastyx outside in Florida is probably really difficult and I want to tackle that problem? Like, was it I'm really interested in this species, so now I got to try and make it work? Or is the making it work where you find the interest, I guess?
It's actually a little bit of both. So okay. It's kind of a combination of both of the former and the latter. Okay. But I wasn't interested in them enough that once I saw that it wasn't working, as fluidly as I wanted, at that point I was just like, you know what, I think I'll leave this to other people that are more dedicated to it. And I mean, you look at what Phil Litz and some of those guys are doing. Phil's out in Colorado, Absolutely. But yeah. he's killing it with those, and that's really probably the best way to do them. I can't think of anything. I just couldn't do them outdoors like that. I don't think, not without a lot of. It probably would have taken 5 years to figure it out. And even then, it may not have worked. Like I said, there's all these things that can go on with an animal that requires that much heat, right? And to be that dry, that's on the extreme end of things. And personally, I prefer to work with things that are found. I don't like to touch equatorial species at all because they have a similar problem. They need basically static year-round temperatures for the most part. I mean, some of the things that occur like up in mountains and stuff like that have more of a range, but I've stayed away so far from like all the forest dragons, which I'm definitely interested in. Heather's very interested in those, like all the ones from Indonesia and, and like the Boyd's forest dragons that are occasionally available and stuff like that. But they definitely require a cooler environment than I think what I can reasonably give them outdoors here. I experimented with some Parsons chameleons this year. Didn't work out. They were having a tough time no matter what I did. So I ended up selling those off to somebody that'll do a better job with them and keep them in a cooler environment. So they kind of reinforced my previous rule that I had for myself, is that don't touch anything that's found in the equator. Just anything that's montane or equatorial, just leave it alone.
Okay.
So, I mean, there are ways that I'm sure I could have worked around it better, but I mean, I threw a lot at those Parsons and they just couldn't handle the heat. The heat was just too oppressive in the midsummer. So, you gotta know your limitations too. And it comes down to how badly I really want to keep something. If I at this stage, I've pretty much kept and bred. I don't even know how many species. Pretty much anytime I've ever had an interest in something, I was like, okay, I'm going to do this. And then I'll go and get some and set them up and work on it. So it's north of 100 species. It may even be north of 200 species. But at this point, I can't even remember them all. So I pretty much feel like I've done almost everything I ever wanted to do, and now I'm more looking at how can I keep my interest and and you know kind of keep the business going without constantly innovating. So I think after this Anole thing is done, this will probably be the last big innovation that I do for a while, unless something, totally out of left field comes up. Um, as far as, kind of pushing another species out to the pole. I think after this, I'm going to settle in someplace. It's probably going to be, more stuff that Heather has an interest in because she's really, really into this stuff still. Like super hardcore about it all the time. Way, way, way more hardcore than I am. Like I need a break. I do it for 6 or 8 months every year, and where I'm 100% in. I'm at the shows. I'm, talking to people and all this, and then I get to the wintertime and I'm like, all right, I'm going to go play World of Warcraft now for the next 4 months. I'll see you guys in the spring when it warms up. And that's kind of how I roll. So where she, she's like all still into it all the time. And, so I'm looking forward to doing the frills and stuff like that. But after this is what we're building now, I hope is like something that's we're still doing this 20 years from now, the same things. We're just a reliable supplier. We try to produce very high quality, lizards for hobbyists is generally, that's really where the bulk of our aim is to, so that's, we may expand into some other species that I've kept in the past or that she's kept in the past. Yeah, I mean, I forgot where we were going, so I just kind of rambled on.
That's the whole point. No, so I interviewed Heather, and she's crushing it with beardeds. But talking about that, like she's hardcore, and it's awesome. Like, does that? I mean, is that? It's just maybe like kind of a different phase type of thing where, because she was hardcore beardeds, really successful with it, did all kinds of cool stuff with it, and then now has some transitioning interests. Some of those things are still like maybe kind of new to her, where like that, I don't know, like that would kind of allow you, like the frill dragons or things where it's like, oh yeah, I tried that before, but especially for somebody like yourself who's been in it for so long, like the tech has also progressed now to the point where a lot of things that you maybe had a little bit of success with, or like, yeah, this worked a couple times, but just really difficult, or chameleons sucked forever, and just, tech and things finally caught up where someone like yourself, now when you have a person like Heather who, oh, hey, banana pectinata, oh, hey, or this or whatever, that would allow someone like yourself to kind of circle back to some of those things because it's maybe more new to her. Now there's a ton more tech, and those things can kind of all catch up a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, but like it's funny you just brought those up. Banana pectinata. Like we have a bunch of banana pectinata. That's something she was really interested in. We were at a show and she wanted those things forever, like 10 or 15 years. And we were at a show at Daytona, and a friend of ours so the banana pectinata thing's kind of weird, man. There are a lot of people that sell banana pectinata that are not banana pectinata. They end up growing into these very large spiny tails that they're basically hybrids between the Florida. So what happened is years ago, the collectors in South Florida used to catch the large pectinatas down in the grounds of the old Burger King Corporation in South Miami. Every once in a while, and I collected those as well myself, and every once in a while you'll catch one that has a lot of yellow on it. Well, they started selling those as banana pectinatas. And so people took them and then crossed them into the real banana pectinata, which the real one should probably be classified as its own thing. It doesn't get much larger than a bearded dragon, maybe 20-30% larger than a full-grown bearded dragon. They're all they have the same kind of, they have a lot of the same similarities that bearded dragons have. They don't really bite. They're very chill. They're, you know, they're small, they're friendly, and they're unique. They're not these 4 foot,
Right.
3 foot, 3.5 foot. They're very specific. And if you've seen the real ones and you put them next to these banana pectinata, you're like, oh yeah, that's totally not the same thing.
Right.
But so we bought a bunch of the real ones and we grew them up, and now they produced this year for the first time. She held back the babies, but that giant monitor enclosure thing that I was telling you about that I had for the lace, I'm going to convert over to be this massive banana pectinata.
Oh, awesome. Okay.
Thing. Yeah. And they're small, so they get a lot of use out of this giant,
Sure.
I mean, it's as big as a house. So yeah, and she'll be able to go in there and take videos of her, interacting with them. They run right up to you and they eat right out of your hand. Yeah. Yeah. They're really awesome. And she loves those things. And they do real well outdoors here in Florida. I mean, obviously there's spiny tail iguanas all over the place, but, yeah. And that's the kind of stuff that I'm actually enjoying right now. That's where I'm getting most of it is she finds stuff she really likes, and I get to tinker around with a system and then develop a system. That's always really kind of been my thing. It's like figuring out how can I set up a system that's fun for us and also really good for the animals, and it also is very productive. So I've got a whole list of other criteria that I just personally stack on, and then so yeah, and so that's pretty much what I do. So that's what I'm always thinking about. I'm always looking at it going, okay, how can I make this better? Sometimes I make things too good, and then I go back. I'm like, oh man, this is very difficult to manage because I put too many plants and too many branches, and now we can't, So then I go back and I kind of start tearing it down a little bit, and then till you find a sweet spot.
I've heard you talk about that before, where you were really struggling with the eggs for the anoles. Dealing with all the plants was a major issue.
Yes, getting the anoles to lay eggs was in a very specific spot was very challenging. It took years to work that out because a lot of times they would just hold the eggs too long and then just dump them on the ground. And then, obviously they were bad, or sometimes they wouldn't even hold them till they just dump them on the ground. And then by the time you found them, they were desiccated. Sometimes we had some instances of egg binding early on, and there was a lot of things. Everything I tried, they weren't having it. There'd be some that would use some of the things that I attempted, but not all of them. You know what I'm saying? Right. So it was a problem. So I kept iterating. Nothing was working. And I was really at this point about to throw in the towel and just accept, okay, well, a certain percentage of these are going to be laid on the ground, and I'm just going to have to come out here constantly and try to get them before, feeders get them or whatever. And then one day, stupid mistake. I went to Home Depot to get the plant that I usually buy for some more enclosures that I was setting up, and they didn't have them. And they had this other plant that was very common called a mass cane plant. And it was super cheap. And I was looking at it going, man, that plant's perfect for this. It's got a nice thick stalk and big leaves at the top. So because night anoles like to hang upside down, and then, they kind of do a death from above thing where they hang upside down and wait for something crawling around at the base of the tree and then plunge down and get their food. So that actually ticked that box. And I was like, okay, this is a perfect plant. Totally awesome. So I bought a whole bunch of them, put them in with the anoles. Everybody was great, but it didn't fix the egg thing. Still, nobody was laying eggs in those pots. They were just dumping them. But then one day I went to pull a pot out for something, and I dropped it. It fell out of my hands and it hit the ground, and all the potting soil spilled out onto the ground. And I looked down at that and I was like, you know what? I'm not in the mood to deal with this crap. And I had cocoa fiber in a big tub that I was moistening for the monitor egg boxes. So I was like, you know what? I'm just going to take this cocoa fiber and jam it on the top of this, refill the pot with this. This is fine, whatever. So just being lazy, I slammed it. I did that, and I put it in the plant. And then within a week or two, the anole in there started laying eggs in that cocoa fiber in the potted plant. And I was like, look at this. So I replaced, like 10 or 12 of the plants that I had with cocoa fiber, and every anole laid its eggs in them. And I was like, oh my God. So then I went through, there's like 40 or 60 anole enclosures with breeders in it. So I went through and I pulled all the plants out, replaced it all with cocoa fiber, and it totally changed the game. I went from struggling to produce anoles every year to now reliably getting damn near every egg. Almost every egg is laid right in the pot. And the mass cane worked out in another way, oddly enough. It was just a weird, perfect storm. Most plants you can't pull out of their pot every week and then repot them and let them live very long.
Yeah.
Turns out that mass cane can take it. And so that plant, every week during the breeding season, I pulled each plant out. I dump out the contents and then get the egg and then repack it, put it back in. It sounds like more work than it is. It really only takes, I timed it. I think I can do each enclosure in 3 minutes. That's if I'm on the ball. I mean, if I'm out there screwing around, listening to music and whatever, it takes longer. But yeah, so, but that was a total.
Being your boss, though.
Yeah, right. Total game changer, though, man. And that was, again, it wasn't really anything I did. It was just a combination of laziness, and just random luck. So, which is a lot of this stuff. That's why when I think it's funny when I see people, really take this shit seriously, and they're like, I did this and I did that. Okay. Yeah. You did whatever, but a lot of this, nobody ever tells you the real stories, how it was, I wasn't feeling it. I didn't care. I was in a hurry. I did this, and then boom, it translated to this, or my power went out, and then all of a sudden these snakes I've been trying to breed for that no one could breed, now they're breeding. There's you hear some of those stories, but a lot of people try to make it seem like it was this fully planned grand thing. That ain't how this works. Most of this stuff is just throwing stuff at the wall, seeing what sticks, and then going from there. And there's a lot of luck involved. There's there's a lot of research. I attribute probably more than anything else to whatever success I have had. It does mostly come from my absolutely insane, like, I really don't do much. I play MMO games. I listen to a hell of a lot of punk rock and metal music, and I read. I get up in the morning and I start reading. Every moment that I have, and I've done this pretty much my entire life. I don't watch sports. I do watch, movies and TV shows that I have an interest in. But for the most part, if I'm not doing one of those things, I'm reading, and half the time I'm still reading even while I'm doing some of those things. So I just devour every piece of information, and then I just kind of sort through it. I just don't accept the information. I think that's where a lot of things go wrong. Just because I'm reading something or you're saying something doesn't mean I'm just going to wholesale accept it. I run it through a filter that says, does this make sense? Is this hubris? Is this conjecture? You know what I'm saying?
Sure.
And then I filter it all, and then I pull out the pieces that I think matter to me, and then I try to build on that. I think that's what's wrong with social media right now, is that you have all these experts, more quotes, that are in these groups giving out information. And I very rarely, I try to stay away from those groups. Every once in a while, somebody will say, hey, did you see this post going on in this group? And they'll send me some screenshots, and I just sit there and face palm. And I'm like, I just don't know. There's so much emphasis on these absolutes. And honestly, I have found that there are very few things that are absolute. As a matter of fact, I would dare to say that probably nothing is absolute anymore, that they're all dependent. Everything is dependent on a number of variables, most of which you can't possibly know from a given situation. That's why I avoid giving out husbandry advice. I give out parameters. This is what I think works good for me, and it might work for you, but it might not. I've had people that I know personally very well that I've tried to help set up stuff and did it, pretty much exactly like I would have it here, and it totally didn't work for them. They had to modify it heavily to get it to work for them. And then it did work. But if they tried to copy what I do, it doesn't work. So there's just no absolutes. And I don't know. I was reading some long crested gecko thing about morphs and how they're fighting back and forth about these morphs today. And I was just like, oh my God, this is why. See, morphs are a weird thing for me. If I were to personally only do things that I really wanted to do that were just solely based on my interests, I probably would not have a single morph. I really do morphs because that's the only way you can survive, financially. I mean, I like a lot of the cool ones. Don't get me wrong. A lot of them are beautiful. I enjoy them. They're neat. And I get why people dig them. But if it was for me personally, I would have a whole bunch of dry mark on, all the different indigo snakes. I have a pair of Mexicans, but I've got them outside. They're doing real well. It's pretty cool to watch them sun themselves. Awesome. And then I actually dug them their own gopher tortoise burrow, and they dive in it. And pretty cool, man. That's something I'm experimenting with. And that's my personal interest. And that's something that if it works well, I could see expanding into, getting yellowtails and blacktails and all that and getting them out because, man,
a bunch of really big snakes that bite like bulldogs.
Right.
Perfect.
Yeah, actually, they don't bite. But no, the cool thing about them is they're kind of lizard-like. I mean, I love all. I've kept and bred all herps. Everything from little frogs to turtles, tortoises. I'm mostly kind of pigeonholed as a lizard guy. I got my start as a snake guy. But I love all this stuff pretty much equally. I just, you can't do it all. So,
sure.
But that snake itches needed to be scratched for a while. And I was looking for something and I'd gone back and forth over a number of things. And then I was just like, that's it. The indigos are like a really good candidate for outdoor keeping in Florida because I can give them these massive enclosures, and they're a very mobile snake. They're not like a ball python that is less, more sedentary than these things. Really, they cruise around and do lots of stuff. So they're kind of lizard-like, and so yeah, I set them up, and I'm really digging them. I go out there; they're the first thing every morning when I get up. I go out there just to look for them and see if they're out, if they're above ground, and what they're doing. And very cool. Really digging that. So
that's awesome.
I don't know. Now I forgot where I was going, but.
Actually, Alex in the chat, he said, any insight regarding your experience on temperate species in a subtropical climate like Florida? Curious regarding your past work with Australian water dragons, getting them to breed outdoors, challenges associated with those type of species.
Okay. Yeah, actually I do have. So temperate species have never been a problem. I bred pretty much somewhere around 30 to 50 species or types of colubrids when I lived in Miami in just a back bedroom that I kept the windows open. That was it. No heat, no cooling, no nothing. I just left them in there. But generally, I believe we got an average of 2 clutches out of almost each one of those every year. There was a lot of cow kings. It was a lot of bull snakes. It was a lot of pine snakes. At one point I had 80 pine and bull snakes. It was just wow. Like I said, if I get into something, I really get into it. And so I had all these morphs and all this stuff. I was digging that. That was a lot of fun. But yeah, I did those in that back room in Miami with no heat, no cooling, no nothing. They produced every year. I just take them off food. I do food cycling for everything. So I've never worried about temperatures at all. As soon as the temperatures start to decrease, which they naturally do everywhere on the planet, I just take things off food. That's it. I just say, okay, you got I can tell when they start to slow down. And then as they do, I let it taper off. Then I generally don't feed for 2 or 3 months. And then when it starts to warm up again and I see they're becoming more active, then I'm like, okay, you guys are ready to eat. And I start it up. And that's worked for every temperate species. I've bred collared lizards, the northern Nevada ones, outdoors in Florida. No problem.
Oh, wow.
Man, produce those things were. It was shocking how I bought a group of them. I didn't think they would do anything. I set them up outside and kind of forgot about them. Just kept adding food and making sure they were okay. And then they laid so many eggs that I didn't even know what to do with them. So it was crazy.
Wow.
And then, jewel lacertus. But to the point about the Australian water dragon, I did work with those after Bert passed. I worked with them previously in the 90s. I had bought some from Bert. But then when Bert passed in the mid 2000s, Scott Corning and I drove up to Alabama and purchased a bunch of adult leisure eye from his wife and his son.
Mm-hmm.
And I brought them back and they did well. I mean, I just had them outside. They were actually very simple. There's really nothing to that animal. You just feed it, make sure it has water, and they lay eggs. They're very, very simple. So very bulletproof. Now, they can take the cold, but we had years where it was pretty mild and they still produced like crazy. So I don't think, again, that the actual temperatures, I personally don't feel like the actual temperatures matter. I think as long as it's a decrease and an increase in temperatures, and that needs to coincide with obviously availability of food. I think that's the only two things that really, really matter. So that's been my experience anyway. So I hope that answered that sufficiently.
So with animals like that, Australian water dragons, jeweled lacertas, you talked about the pectinata earlier. I don't know why Tenosaura in general aren't more popular.
Right.
How do you view that or I don't know, like why do you think those things come to pass or don't come to pass? Like how are red-eyed croc skinks not super popular? How are there not 50 other agamid choices along with bearded dragons like that? There's just a lot of weird parts of herpetoculture on that part that have never made sense to me. But I also am not a person who produces animals. So as someone who produces animals, like, do you also see those things, or did you produce a lot of Australian water dragons and it turns out they suck, or like what? How do you see those things happen on the end of producing them and selling them and that type of thing?
Well, I mean, the Bert used to produce hundreds of water dragons, Australian water dragons every year.
Absolutely.
It may have been around 1,000, I believe. And he had trouble selling them in the US. He used to hibernate the babies, load them into a suitcase while they were hibernated, then fly out to Europe, board the train system, and ride trains and meet herpetoculturists in Europe from stop to stop and sell them Australian water dragons. This was how Bert got rid of most of the water dragon. It was the weirdest. And I remember him telling me that how he was doing this. And I was like, you're going to such great lengths to get but for him, I think there was two really ulterior motives of why he did that. One, he wanted very much to put them in the hands of people that he knew would continue work with them.
Sure.
He didn't want to just sell them to the big box, which is kind of the route that I usually take when I have too much. I have friends that, that I can wholesale to that do the big box thing. And then I'm not going to get in a train and go to stops all over the U.S. to hand deliver animals. But Bert cared very much about that. And I think it was a social thing for him. He got to see people that he doesn't get to see, friends that he has all over. But
that's one of those figures in the history of herpetoculture where you say something like that. And I think most people who have ever read about him or if you came up in a time where like I saw a few interviews with him and different things and like, yeah, that makes sense. Like, it's the train guy with the lizards like that. Right. Okay.
He's very, very eccentric, very committed. But yeah, when I was producing them, I couldn't sell them. I used to wholesale those to Ben Siegel for $45 a piece, the Australian water dragons, and I had to beg him to take them. So this is like 2006, 2007. They were very, very hard to sell. No one cared, and So that's what I did with them because I couldn't move them. And then I ended up canceling that project because I was like, well, I only have X amount of space, and these are taking up these 4 enclosures that if I had, a couple bearded dragons in each one of those, I would make way more money than I'm making off these water dragons. So that was why I canceled it. It was an economic decision. I just couldn't justify the space at the time. At the time, we were really struggling as well. So those were I just couldn't afford to have projects that weren't pulling their financial weight.
Sure.
And the water dragons were not. Nowadays, they sell very well for a few $100s or more. I wonder how big that interest really is, if it's just because they haven't been around for a long time, and then there's a few, and so all the people that really wanted them are buying them.
Right.
But I do think that animals, it's very interesting, it's very cool, and I think more people should have an interest in it. I think there's 2 problems with it. I think one, most people have never seen a big one, like even the ones that Eddie Soto has, or the ones that there's this kid down in South Florida. His name is escaping me right now, but he's producing them as well. Both of those guys, though, theirs aren't really big yet. Like they're young animals. I think when people see big ones, like 7-8-year-old ones that have these massive head, the males have these giant heads, and they're very, very impressive animals. The problem is it takes a long time. They're very slow growing for an agamid. It takes a long time to get them that big.
Yeah.
But once they're big, they are cool. I mean, they are seriously, when you see a big black and gray banded one sitting on a log, with its head up in the air, basking, it's very impressive.
Yeah.
So I think that's the problem, is that the babies are very kind of unimpressive, and that all the ones that are currently people are breeding are still young animals. They haven't had the time yet to get to those big, giant, sizes that they're capable of. So I think when that occurs, I think there might be some more interest in them too, because it's a substantial animal. It's very well suited for captivity. It can take a wide range of temperatures, which kind of foolproofs it a little bit. It's hard to fuck it. I'm sorry. It's hard to screw it up. I think that's what's going on. And then when you look at the things that are really popular, they all have there's like a few things that they all have in common. They don't bite generally. They're very easy to care for. They're, readily available because they don't bite, and they're very easy to care for. So there's all these things, There's super cool animals. There's a lot of very cool tropical agamids, a lot of those angle-headed dragons and forest dragons and all that stuff. Very awesome things that I would maybe one day like to work with. Who knows? There are people that are working on some of that stuff that I know of. But again, it's going to take somebody to really get in there, unlock, and find out because all these things are simple, right? It's just a matter of figuring out how to make them simple. So nothing is as we overcomplicate everything. That's the one true lesson that I got from this, because back when I started doing this stuff in the late 80s, everybody told me, oh, you can't breed Tegus in captivity. They can't be bred. That made me want to do it more. So, and then I met Bert in like the early 90s, and he was doing the black and whites. And I said, yeah, I do them outdoors in Alabama and all this. And we start talking about, I'm like, well, I really want to do, so I looked at what he was doing, and he was working at the time solely with Argentine black and whites. And I was like, all right, I'm going to go do reds and work on some of these more tropical ones. And then the blue Tegus got imported, and I got a hold of those. And I kind of I always, like I said, I try not to walk behind anyone else. And I always try to kind of, do my own thing, my own direction. So that way I just, it's not really a competition thing. It's that I just don't see the point. You know what I'm saying? I mean, I feel like if I'm going to do something, for me to be happy about, I need to try to do something that is somewhat, in some way, different than what's currently being done, which you can do that in a variety of ways. There are people that do it all the time with morphs, people that take ball pythons in a totally different direction than the direction that everybody's going this way, and then this guy breaks off and goes this way, and all of a sudden you know who the guy who broke off is, because he's now producing these crazy looking things that nobody else has, because everybody else was chasing this one specific more for a group. And that's just, that goes back to, just thinking about what, and I think if more people did that, we'd have much more varied things. I think right now, a lot of people, which is pretty common. I mean, I think it is safer to just, okay, that's really popular, let me go do that. Like I'm not going to lie, I kept bearded dragons the entire time because they are safe. They paid my bills no matter what happened. The bearded dragons always produced a few thousand babies a year that were guaranteed to sell as fast as they were produced, and I would be able to eat. So,
well, and that's a major difference of a person who does it for a living. Like there are, from the hobbyist to the business consideration, like that's a totally different animal.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And I personally tried to keep it as, I really don't like the idea of, I shouldn't say it like that. I just don't want to ever think of or have anyone ever refer to me as a businessman. Not that there's anything wrong with that. That's just not my thing. I always try to keep, it's like, I don't know, maybe it's the punk rock in me. I don't know. I do a very DIY kind of go my own path. I don't want to, I don't really make any decisions. The bigger decisions are not made financially. If they were, we would not be doing a lot of the things we're doing. Like the Anoles have been an incredible investment and risk, and just recently started to pay. So, but there was 10 years in there where they made nothing, and they just, gobbled up funds, and it was substantial considering all the iteration and failed systems that I had built, that I just, for one reason or another, wasn't happy with them.
Right.
So I try not to make decisions off of that, but they do obviously factor in, because again, everybody's got to eat. You got to keep the lights on, and when you have a collection of this size, it has to eat, and it eats way more than the rest of than we do.
Right.
So,
so my wife and I do shows. That's our reptile thing, is we do educational shows. And the platform and things that we use for booking and stuff like that is actually a platform that originated with musicians and like costume actors. You bring Elsa to your kid's birthday or whatever,
right?
And it's very gig culture type of thing. That seems like your jam, like your style. You grew up catching stuff, and you were very young, and it was very much like a side hustle kind of thing, and then it became everything. But it's still, when I hear you talk, and I was, sometimes people on YouTube give me a hard time because I don't just grill guests about, I need to know the parameters for Anoles. Like that's not how I talk. And I threatened to just talk to you about MMOs and music this whole time, and not about reptiles. But if people actually follow your social media or see you actually interact with those type of things, that is stuff that you talk about a lot. You don't always talk about reptiles. You have other interests, and it just seems to kind of be that thing. Like it's a side hustle gig culture that became, you are now a member of the industry and function as such, and are an adult with a house who, likes to eat 3 times a day, but like, it's still, the way you refer to it and seem to interact with it is still very musician gig culture. You're not really hitting the road. You're getting through your projects type of thing.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, I do think of this, and I will often refer to this in terms that, with the people around me anyway, where it is kind of, I do think of it like this is a band. We're doing this thing. We're outputting this record. But, I kind of look at it that way. It's more of an art thing for me, even though I wouldn't call myself an artist. But I definitely, it's not really a business. This is just what I do. Like I never
Right.
really thought about any of this stuff. It was just like, okay, well, this is what I'm going to do. This is what I want to do. And I've always just kind of done it. I mean, I never once, I think I never once allowed, how do I say that? I just think that in general, just human society, and there's no like nefarious intent behind it. It's just the way we are. We just kind of try to push everybody into this, the corral. Like, you need to go and get this job and do this thing and be miserable for the rest of your life. And then when you're 55 or 60, maybe we'll let you retire and you can go enjoy whatever you got left. I just never wanted that. And there was no way I was ever going to go along with that. I was just like, why am I going to do anything but what I want to do? And I just need to figure out how I can get paid for what I want to do.
Right.
And I mean, that's essentially, if you think about it, what most, musicians do. I'm thankfully the reptile industry I've gotten to know quite a few musicians, some of them pretty notable because they were actually reptile people. And they came to me at some point and said, "Hey, I'd like to buy some stuff from you." And I'm like, "Oh my God, I'm a fan of yours." And,
I've on the side met and messaged people where it's like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
Where it turns out they have hobbies too.
Right. Yeah. So that's been super cool. But I feel like I had a lot, as far as, why they do what they do. And I have the same thing in common with them. It was never about, okay, I'm going to start a business and here's a business plan and I want to do this. It's never was that way for me. It was always just like, this is who I am. This is what I like to do. And I just got to figure out a way to get paid for it. And yeah, it's pretty much been a hustle. That's pretty much how it works when you do it this way. But, I've never had to have advertising, and somehow I've never had to do any of this stuff. I show up at a couple of shows a year and get to talk to cool people for 2 days usually. And usually bounce out of there with a lot of amazing ideas. Like it's almost a blessing and a curse. I go to Tinley and then, 2 days later, I'm coming back and I'm like, well, I talked to this guy and he gave me this idea and I talked to that person and they gave me that idea. And then I go home and I'm like, oh, maybe I should do this now and go in a totally different direction. So
yeah,
it has impacts on me. Sometimes I don't make good decisions after that. And then, but sometimes I do come back with some really good, there's just so many amazing people in this hobby that, when you have a chance to talk to them face to face for a couple hours or whatever, or even something, like 10, 15 minutes at a show, that's a pretty positive exchange. So,
yeah.
I don't know. I just feel like I've been very, very blessed with, by this industry as a whole. It's been very good to me. I've had a damn good ride, even with all the ups and downs. I wouldn't trade a minute of it for anything. So,
well,
I don't know.
Maybe 20 minutes ago, you were talking about how you hope to be producing Anoles in 20 years. So I think you got a little bit. You got a little bit going on.
Yeah.
Eric Haycraft is in the chat and he asked, have you ever had any issues with mosquitoes and the potential for transmission of disease or anything like that because you keep outside so much?
No, as far as I know, I've never witnessed mosquitoes. At least the kind we have here, they don't seem to bother the reptiles at all. Like I'm not saying that it couldn't happen. I may not even notice if it happened, but generally I tend to live so I intentionally pick the places that I live to be in the drier parts of Florida. Like people think Florida is this big swamp, but it's really not. There's a lot of areas that are hilly and sandy and have cactuses that grow natively. Well, that's where I always live. There are gopher tortoises on my property. There are eastern indigos on the properties. So I choose that because that means that it doesn't flood and I can keep a lot of stuff, and I don't it's easier to deal with. If I when we were moving places, if we would go and I would notice that the dirt, the first thing I do is look at the dirt And if it's black mud, nope, I'm out. I don't. I know, because black mud means it floods.
Right.
It's and then it's essentially worthless. I mean, I could keep very wet species, but it would really limit the stuff that I could keep outdoors. You can't even keep tegus on that kind of stuff without it backfiring on you at some point.
Right.
So the ground needs to be very dry. After it rains, it needs to drain off and be gone within an hour after a rain. If it doesn't, then it's a problem. So that's how I ended up. So where I'm at, when I keep stuff outside, I'm in a drier place. There's less mosquitoes because of that. And I've never really had any issues with that. We do have, wild insects that in enclosures. As a matter of fact, we hardly have to feed the blue tongues, because the blue tongues get these wild ground roaches that are in all their enclosures, and they gorge themselves on them. Like we kept putting food in to feed them, and they weren't eating. And I'm like, oh, well, maybe Heather's coming around earlier and feeding them, and I'm just, we're just not communicating. So one day I asked her, I'm like, you been feeding the blue tongues? And she's like, no, I thought you were feeding the blue tongues. I'm like, I am, but they're not eating. And so we dug them up, and they're all super fat. And I was like, what the hell's going on here? And then a couple of months later, I didn't really think much of it. I thought, well, maybe they're just going off feed, early, because it was coming into fall, but not early enough. Then what we discovered was, when I put their new systems together, I had used, my property is like full of leaves. It's full of giant oak trees that shed all the time, and there's like a 3-inch leaf litter thing around the whole on 5 acres. So I've got a lot of leaves. So I was like, oh, well, these will be great for the blue tongue. So I backfilled all of the blue tongue enclosures. I buried a pipe for them to hide in, these plastic corrugated pipes they sell at Home Depot for irrigation or something. So I buried them, and then I covered them with a thick layer of leaves. Well, it turns out when I did that, I created the perfect environment for these native wood ground roaches that live outside. And the cages, their enclosures are full of ground roaches, and the blue tongues eat them at will, all they want. The bearded dragons get them too, and so do pretty much all the lizards do. So it's actually turned out to be this pretty cool thing. And so there's stuff like that unintended, again, another totally unintended circumstance. It was just a weird combination of things that just clicked. And man, those blue tongues look great, and they produce really well this year. So I was like, oh, maybe, getting all that wild, insects that are full of stuff that it's hard to get them in captivity. That's been working. So
that's
no
awesome. Mosquito
problem, Eric. None. The bacillus, man.
Yeah. There's a handful of people, and I've said it a bunch of times throughout the episodes that I've done, but the people that I've ended up coming across, the Eddies and Eric, and like half the chat, Mike Stefani, all these different people are just crushing it with so many different species that I hope that some of the diversity you were talking about earlier, I know it is for these folks, but I'm hoping enough people buy from them to establish it as being, in herpetoculture, not just in my 5 friends' basements.
Right. That is the problem, is that all the guys that are going to be interested in that are going to be, well, I shouldn't say that, but the people that are going to tune into this podcast are going to be people like that for the most part, right, that are really into that kind of stuff, so they're all you're going to collect them all in Lizard Brain Radio, just your whole series. That's what it does. It's for lizard nerds. So, and you guys are preaching to the choir. You all know, you're all into all that stuff, and they all know all this stuff. And it's the general, herpetoculture is so big now, and there's so many. Like, I remember when it was totally the domain of lizard nerds like us, these rednecks that wanted a giant snake, and these thug, drug dealer types. That's you could sum up the entirety of and I mean, I knew all those. I had friends in all of those sectors, and they were very easy. Now it's like, you have moms and like normal people, that that like are not, like we're a very counterculture. The core of us is a very counterculture kind of hobby.
Yeah.
We're the weirdos, you know. But
Well, and I live relatively close to Tinley, and it's changed a lot even since I was
yeah,
a kid. But like you can still go to Tinley and see some of those people that like grew up a little bit, but maybe didn't really get a real job yet,
right.
or like there's still like 4 or 5 biker dudes walking around, or like that one lady
Yeah,
that's not really wearing enough clothes to probably be here,
right,
and then you get all these families walking through that are like, what is
right.
going on? And it's like,
Yep,
no, it's cool. That's their own section. Don't worry about it.
right,
Like just the geckos you want for your kid are right over here, you
right.
know.
Yep.
So that element's definitely still there. Or I mean, like even on the music front, Kerry King walking around
I know.
NARBC all the time, and there's all these families that are just like, oh, uh, sunglasses guy with the carpet python, like
Right,
no idea, And then you get like 3 or 4 kids with band T-shirts that come on. They're like, what are you doing at a snake show?
right.
And it's those.
I,
There's a lot of weird cultures that bounce around that kind of place.
you know what's funny about that? I met Kerry King at the 1991 Reptile Expo. It was Daytona, but it was in Orlando at the time. And he had just been in Miami at the doing Clash of the Titans. And I was a huge Slayer fan from their first record. And I walked by him and I was like, oh, that's Kerry King. And my wife at the time, I wasn't going to talk to him. I was way too nervous. And when I walked by his show, she pushed me into him. So we struck up a conversation, and then it turned out that we were into the same stuff. So we talked the whole weekend, and then later on we exchanged phone numbers, and him and I talked almost daily for years. And he would send me, like, I was really into Danzig. Danzig put out their third or fourth record at the time, and they were on the same label as Kerry. So he sent me all this promo stuff and an early release of the record. And I got to see System of a Down in a little private room before they were famous, when they were just being signed to Def American. I was in the same room it was this little tiny room with me, the guys from Slayer, the guys from God Lives Underwater, Rick Rubin, and a bunch of other Reptile execs. And System of a Down was on this tiny little stage right in front of us, and they played. And then Slayer went up and played. And yeah, I mean, like I said, dude, this industry's I've gotten into a lot of Ozfest as a guest and because of knowing Kerry and, and then from him I met other people. I met Perry Farrell from Jane's Addiction and hung out with him one night, just shooting the shit. It was, I have had a hell of a ride, and I would not trade this for anything. So I don't know.
It's like you hear Justin Julander and some of the other folks that are really hard carpet nerd people.
Yep.
And I love Justin, but I couldn't think of a more anti-Kerry person in carpet pythons than somebody like Justin. And I've heard him talk about it, where he's like, oh yeah, I was at a concert or whatever, and I was going to talk to him about this carpet thing that I was doing or whatever. And then, of course, all the people that are in the Justin's part of the world are like, you're going to go where to do what? And he's like, oh no, I'm not actually going. I'm going to wait backstage, and I got to talk to him about some snake stuff. And it's a very insane cross culture. And then fast forward to now, where what I do is, and my wife a ton now, is 50 elementary schools a year,
Right.
And the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago, and like, from super nerds to 8-year-olds, and then I go to NARBC and I go to the auction, and it's Brian Potter saying things you cannot bring children around.
Right.
Like it's just so very different.
That's good though, man. I know a lot of people that are really super hardcore dislike that fact, but I mean, honestly, it was important for this to happen, or I think we would be in much more danger of being, eradicated through
Oh
legislation.
yeah. Yeah.
That's definitely our shield, is that, we've infiltrated the pop culture.
Yeah.
We like I mean, I just saw a car ad that had a bearded dragon on it the other
Yeah.
day when I was like, what the? So, and then there's Geico Gecko and all that stuff. So,
Yeah.
I mean, all that stuff is important, and we needed that. I mean, I grumble about it, myself. I mean, like I said, I'll go on Facebook and see some stupid argument over some crap that doesn't matter, where somebody's arguing that their thing is better than your thing because they, and whatever. That is kind of irritating, especially when it's people that have no idea. It's always the ones that have no idea what they're talking about, that are
Sure.
so sure that they know. So that's actually how I decide whether or not somebody's worth wasting my time on, is how sure are you? If you're really not sure about stuff, then we'll talk. Then I know that you're smart enough to know that, like, I don't know anything. I've been at this for 40 years and I don't know anything. I know less today than I did when I started, because when I started, I thought I knew stuff. That got beat out of me over time. So, yeah, I don't know. And there's hope for Zoolander, by the way. I posted a new Melvins record the other day, and he made a comment on it. And then he was like, I was thinking, oh, well, maybe there is some hope for you. Maybe you.
I think his kids and Chuck Poland are going to drag him into being hip.
Right.
Someday.
Those two are cool, man. I've been on that show a few times. I've known Zoolander for a long time, since he was a kid, I think. He used to, like you said, a lot of these guys now, you guys are adults now and running your own podcasts and stuff. But when I was like in my 20s and you guys were all, like in your teens and kids, you guys used to call me or send me messages and ask me stuff. And it's fun. John Adragna from Sim, I bust his chops all about that all the time, because he used to nag the hell out of me. Hey, I got this water money. He was like 15. He had a squeaky little voice. And all them guys, John would call me all the time, and Zoolander would call every once in a while or send me letters. I don't remember how I corresponded with him, but now Zoolander's a virologist and has his own podcast. And
oh yeah, well, and the
writes books.
The negativity and stuff you were talking about with all the Facebook group nonsense, like that existed in the forum days, old school stuff, just in a little bit different vein, I suppose. But like I don't think people realize how tight knit that stuff was, like that.
Oh yeah.
And to have people like yourself who are still in it now, because a lot of people end up transitioning out, and people are different phases of life and all sorts of things. But for people that stayed in it, like a guy like Mike Stefani, who is always hanging out in the chat, and I talk to that guy all the time. He was Mike with the monitors from the King Snake forum, like that guy, and 20 years ago, and now it's transitioned to where I think things like a lot of the Facebook groups and stuff like that, a lot of the nonsense of social media, which is probably in any, whatever hobby you're into, fish or whatever, I'm sure those people are there as well. It just seems like more of the forum people that hang out at Tinley, people that hang out at Daytona, like that are maybe like one or two notches above a person who's a pet keeper. This seems to be kind of where they've transitioned of, oh, I like this show and I chat with people and I ask questions and this is where I do that. Or there's, little group chats on, if you have a little group chat on Instagram where you talk to these 5 guys about the frogs you'd like or whatever. It seems to have transitioned more to, I don't know, what I think of as old school herpetoculture, right? Like 5 guys that met at a Waffle House and traded Alterna king snakes off this one road in Texas.
Yep.
And then it blew up, which is awesome because all these kids buy geckos and whatever, and that gets Exoterra and these people to give us enclosures and lights and the things that we need to keep our weird stuff. But now, because all the people that I know are so scattered around the country, I don't meet up with them for a drink, or I don't meet up with them for dinner on Sunday or whatever. I have a little group chat where I talk to them, and people talk to me about fossorial things and a lot of weird stuff, and I get
Right.
added to these little chats that are just named strange things. And
Right.
I literally was added to one a little while ago about fossorial things, where someone was, hey, what do you think about making an ant colony for blind snakes? Just insane topics, to where it seems to be way more close knit, but we're maybe using this tech for how people hoped it would be used. Like, I don't know. Like, I would never find you in the mass of a Facebook group. I would see you at Tinley because I go there pretty frequently, or I would talk to you in a way like this, or just Facebook message, hey, I got a question,
Right.
whatever. It's much more intimate, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, I won't use any of the. I've been added to. There was a time where people just kept adding me to those groups, and finally one day, my feed was so flooded with groups that I didn't even want to be in, that I finally one day went through, sat down. It took me like 4 or 5 hours to purge them all. And then I've been pretty ruthless about purging them to this day, because I just don't want to. There's just so much kind of romper room discourse that occurs in them. Now, you brought up the forum days. Some of those forums were brutal. Like the carpet python forums, I used to read for pure entertainment, to watch these guys fight it out. However, those were generally intelligent conversations with people trying to work out how to do this stuff better. What I see on Facebook a lot is some, small business entity trying to build a name for themselves by tearing down the other businesses. And so I have absolutely no respect for that. As soon as I see that person or that group of people gets thrown into my personal, that's someone I'm not ever going to do anything with, period. Because I find that to be incredibly annoying, and it's bad for everybody. It's bad for them, the person that's doing it, and it's bad for the people they're doing it to. It's not good for anybody. You're never going to be successful if your method of that is to tear down the other guy rather than try to raise yourself up to exceed that person or whatever perceived thing. See, I've never even tried to look at any of that way. I really don't consider anyone my competitors, which is one of the reasons why we freely give out all the information, that we come up with. I view everybody as, first of all, there's enough to go around for everybody. It's not like there's some finite source. I realize right now the economy's bad, and a lot of these guys are, especially smaller people that don't have, big reps behind them, are struggling right now to sell certain types of animals that, like I don't even want to mention the types, but some of those species, there seems to be a bit of a market glut. So the people that don't really have a name for themselves for those are definitely getting hurt by this, which sucks. And that's unfortunate. And so, but I think, and so, God, I don't even know where I was going with that. Man, I'm so scatterbrained tonight. I'm tired. I've just been dealing with stuff.
So you are a music fan and are very into that. Have you seen the Sonic Highways documentary for the Foo Fighters?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did watch that.
So when you talk about those things, like you can hear the influence of those things, of like, the viral media marketing and using the algorithms and all the toxic crap that it kind of happens in that industry as well.
Mm-hmm.
Is kind of what you were referring to, with Facebook groups, and there's a lot of crossover there of how to trash people to push your brand and all that kind of thing. And then the you every time I hear you talk about stuff, especially be very introspective, and when you were on Project Herpetoculture with Phil and Roy, it made me think of it. Is when so it, when they were making that documentary, you hear Dave Grohl talking, and he gets interviewed about Nirvana all the time, and then the Foo Fighters and all these different things, and his thing was get some buddies, go in your garage, and just suck as a band.
Yep.
And then one day you'll wake up and be the biggest band in the world.
Yep.
And that's what he tells people happened with Nirvana. He's like, yeah, we
Yep.
were terrible. And then one day they said that we were awesome. Like
Yes.
it just worked,
Yes.
That very much correlates to how I hear you talk about that, like, yes, that, there are people that are struggling, and there's economic things and finance and so on and so forth of how things are kind of going right now.
Yep.
But just with that gig hustle culture, I don't know. I hear that.
Yeah. I'm sorry.
Go ahead. No, but like that, if you're involved in those communities, they kind of develop in the way that you're talking about now as well, with, the Morelia forums and things, or the King Snake forums, or like, they're pretty hardcore, but they were hardcore with intent.
With a purpose.
There was a purpose. It was, it's some of those band scenes are pretty hardcore, and it's a little crazy. And then, and with a purpose, with intent, with, it's not just the nonsense of screaming into the void of Facebook type of thing. There was something behind it.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah. I don't think anybody that knows me has not heard me say at least one time that, I basically, when I was about 18, I had two things I wanted to do. One was find a way to make a living doing reptiles, or two, I wanted my own punk rock band. I wanted to be, Black Flag and stuff like that. So, obviously the one that was right for me is the one I took. But I don't know. I often wonder, man, had I really pursued the other, could I have done something with that? And when I say punk, I'm not talking about like Green Day. I mean, I like Green Day too, but none of that pop punk stuff. I was going after, violent, angry, because I was a pretty angry kid. Yeah. And I mean, I absolutely do frame everything in that way. I wouldn't know how to be a business person, period. It's just not in my wheelhouse. And so over the years, I've had a lot of people come to me and say, oh, I want to get into this, and I want to do what you do, but I can't, I don't have any money. I don't have this and that. Let me tell you something. When I started this thing that it turned into, my wife was pregnant with my daughter. We had $200 in the bank. We were both out of jobs, and I was 18, and I dropped out of high school when I was 16. And just by sheer will and willingness to just get out there and think and do stuff and try to find, that's what it became. So it just kept going. I had no financial backing at all. None. I bought a couple of bearded dragons. I went to a friend of mine named Stevie Moy, who is now the manager for Reptile Industries for Mark Bell's thing.
Mm-hmm.
Steve and I were good friends, and he had a couple of bearded dragons he had gotten from Sandfire Dragon Ranch, and I gave him my $200 and bought those and produced them within 6 months. And that's what built everything. At the time, bearded dragons wholesale were like $150 or something, which even in today's terms, wholesale on bearded dragons for $150 would be awesome.
Right.
So back then it was really awesome. And so I started collecting, Cuban anoles and different anoles and supplying the pet trade. And I'd go out every morning and go collecting for a couple hours, and then come home and take care of animals. And then once the bearded dragons started going, and I had a pair of Burmese pythons I got them to produce, and at the time, those were super hot.
Right.
So I just took everything I made, and it started from nothing with no help. I didn't have any credit cards. I didn't take out any loans. And I just kept rolling and rolling and rolling and just hustling, which, you use the word hustle a couple of times, and that really is a good way to describe my tenure in this. It's been hustle, and it just kept going, and I failed, and I almost lost my house in 2004, and that was a bad time, but that was my own hubris that got me there. I thought I could do no wrong, and I tried to set up 250 Tegus and produce them on a large scale, which was incredibly stupid. And and I learned from it, and I came back better than before. Each time when I fail, that's the important part. A lot of people will wallow in failure, and that's how you get screwed. And I can relate to that, because that was when I was younger, that was my thing. I failed, and then I would wallow in it for a while. But I learned that, okay, you lick your wounds for, however much time you need. For me, it seems to be about a month. And then you got to get back up and get going, and just make sure that you learn why that happened to you, and you analyze the hell out of that so that you can avoid making that mistake again. So the next time, the next big mistake will be different, but it won't be the same one. And and that's how you progress. That's why I like those MMO games, because that's kind of the same thing. You build a character, you suck, you practice, and you join these big groups, and eventually you climb that ladder, and you can get into the top 10%, top 1% if you're really dedicated to it. I like that. I like climbing that ladder. I'm all about that. And it's not to be better than anyone else. It's to be the best me that I can possibly be. I care very much about that. So that's why I've been willing to look at my own failings pretty hard and try to fix them. So that's, like I said, philosophy stuff, helped me out a lot. A lot of old stuff, a lot of the Eastern stuff, even American stuff like Alan Watts and Nietzsche, and I've read a lot of that stuff, and that I got a lot. Man, I learned a lot from that. That honestly, that stuff should be taught to kids in elementary school, because then, you would end up with the tools to deal with life, and but they don't really teach you that, and that
it's usually people finding it after the bad thing happens.
Right. And that's how it was. Yeah. That's how it was for me, man. It took me to wind up on my bathroom floor with a 12 gauge and contemplating putting myself out forever in 2004 to get to that point. But again, that's why when you were talking, that was my ego that got me there. That was my hubris. That was my, I can't, everything I do is going to be good. And every idea that pops into my head is good, man. I learned the hard way. It really isn't. So, but
I mean, that's, like I said at the start though, and you are right that it's criminal that that's not part of education, but the vast majority of people that you would meet that would list off some of those authors, some of those sources that you're talking about, it's usually because, and they're like, they can tell you, oh, this time, this is the thing, this is the thing, this is the, this was the check mark that's why I read that book. That's why I know these sayings. That's, there's usually that driving incident or whatever it was that's why those people now know those things,
Right.
And it definitely is something where if you go through that or study that or read that and learn those things, that you can't help but feel like, had you been given those tools earlier, you may not have gotten to the check mark that caused you to find them later. That having those coping skills or whatever they may be, that's a huge thing. That's a very American Western culture void that we seem to be missing.
Yeah, it is definitely one of the, and I've thought about that too. A lot. I thought, well, if I would have known this before, would this have happened to me? But honestly, it's hard to say.
Sure.
Maybe,
Yeah.
maybe you're not. You have to be. You have to go through hell to be receptive to those ancient messages that
True.
you know.
Yeah. I mean,
You know
yeah.
what I mean?
That's everybody is an angry teenager,
Yeah.
and then in various phases of that as you get older.
Yeah.
For
Exactly.
sure. Yeah.
For
Yes.
sure.
Absolutely. Um, since we're totally not on the lizard topic, just to make the handful of people mad who will comment later. Um, and we are actually cruising to 2 hours. I do actually want to ask you though. Other than do you only play WoW? Do you play other games? So my wife and I played EQ2, Rift, Arcage, and we really haven't done a whole lot. I've done a lot of did the Assassin's Creed entire series with my kids because they all love the historical imagery and storytelling on that. So is WoW it for you, or are you playing other things?
I mean, yeah, I play a lot of stuff, but I played all those games you mentioned.
Okay.
None of them very seriously. The two games that I played the most was from '99 to 2004. I played EverQuest, the first one, very, very hard. I mean, we're
Okay.
talking 8 to 10 hours a day hard. Um, that
Awesome.
that actually hurt. That actually had a negative effect on my life too. That helped to lead up to that
Yeah.
2004 crash. I was, man, dude, I was so addicted to the first EverQuest. That was everything I had ever wanted in a video game, and I just loved it. I got into hardcore raiding, and
Yep.
at the time, everybody was on call if a dragon spawned at 3 a.m. and in
Yep.
the burning woods, and the person that would get on the phone and call all 50 of us in the guild up and wake us up, and we'd have to log in and go kill this dragon before the Japanese team got to it or the
Yep.
Europeans got to it. Man, I love that. And there were times where everybody would be assembling, and just whoever could get it assembled first to pull the dragon to kill it. It was just, I loved that. That was so intense, but it had a very negative impact on my life at the time. And then in 2004, WoW dropped, and I went over to that and played that super hardcore. But I've honestly played WoW since. I've never stopped. So it's been 18 years. And
Wow. That's awesome.
right. Yeah, it's crazy, dude. And in between that, I played Diablo, all those games. I like character building stuff, and I was
Okay.
really hardcore into first person shooters for a long time. Doom, Quake, and then some of the other Unreal tournament and stuff like that. I used to
Yeah.
play in these little local tournaments and stuff around here, and I have my gamer friends, and I try to keep them separate from my reptiles. When I'm over there with them, you don't talk to me. I don't want to hear anything about reptiles. And it's like kind of like this. I have these friend groups that are completely split, and there's very little overlap. Every once in a
Yeah.
while, I'll meet somebody like you that overlaps into over. For the most part, herper nerds and gamers are kind of separate.
Yeah, I actually have definitely noticed that a lot of the folks, especially like on Rift and Arcade, we were gilded up for all of those. My wife got much farther into the rating than me, and we'd be on. We used Vent for our group chats
Right.
and things, and
Yep.
and that world is a little bit like this world in that the people, and it was a really, really diverse group of people.
Right.
There was like a banker in Canada, a
Right.
priest, because that dude has a lot of free time, like
Yep.
just a lot of very, very diverse people. And yeah, and actually when we were doing it as well, very few herp nerds that were in that part of the world. Yeah.
Yep. In the 18 years I've been in WoW, I had one person, one guy that got into the guild, that nobody knew him. And then at some point it came out on, somebody posted my real name on one of our forums. We had forums at the time. This was like 2005. And he realized that it was me. and he was a reptile guy, and he was like, "Oh my God, you're Ron St Pierre, like the real Ron St Pierre." And I was like, "Oh." He's like, "Yeah." And then he was just, and then he wouldn't leave me alone. He just kept pestering me. He was all into like Tegus and stuff, and it was really weird. I was kind of glad when he left, and then, I mean, I'm all for. I don't mind having herpers, especially on my team or whatever. I just, when I'm in those games, I do not want to hear about reptiles. I need the separation to maintain my own
Sure.
sanity.
Yeah.
So otherwise it's just 24 hours of reptiles, and I just can't, I just can't burn like that anymore.
Yeah.
I guess I don't know if I ever could, but so once I started
Well, and
splitting my life up like that, it was better.
it's a hobby, so it's supposed to be its own mental break from
Right.
whatever it is.
Yes.
If it's a mental break from reptiles or a mental break from work or whatever it is, like that's the whole idea.
Yeah.
Is that, especially when you get, or I think when you get into like MMOs, and if you're playing hardcore and you're with a group or whatever, because it's, that is not the same thing as sitting down and playing PlayStation. It's
No.
just so much more involved,
Yes.
and we were kind of the same way, especially when we were gilded up and doing stuff. Of that's how you end up spending so much time, and you don't think about
Realize it.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then you're like, why is the sun coming up? Like,
Right.
oh, that's right, because the other dudes in this are from Australia, or they're from
Right.
or whatever, and
Yeah.
it's the casino effect of you
Yep.
don't put it together. Yeah.
Yeah, I have friends that will come over, and I'll be in the middle of a raid or something. They'll just stop by unannounced, and they're like, and I'm like, well, you're gonna have to wait out there for a minute because I got 30 other people or 25 other people here depending on me to do my job. And
Yeah.
they're like, well, can't you just pause it? I'm like, no, that's not
Yeah.
how this.
Yeah.
There's no pause here. This
Yep.
is not what you think it is. It's not. That's why I play those games. They're super deep. I spend as much time researching those as whatever game I'm playing, classes,
yeah.
and all that stuff that goes with it. I love that there's that much to do and research.
Yeah.
And
Especially something like WoW, when you get into lore and books and
Yep.
yeah, very much.
And by the way, that new expansion just released a couple days ago for WoW. And let me tell you something, dude. I pretty much had lost faith in them. The last few expansions have just been progressively going down.
Yeah.
They pulled it out, man. You get the dragon riding is just unreal. It's the total game changer. I think it's going to bring back a lot of people. It's shocking how good it is. Like, I can't put it down. I've had to pull myself away a couple times this week and say, okay, I got to go outside and do some work. I can't sit in here and plug away all day.
Yep.
But yeah, man, it's funny. I didn't know you did that stuff.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely.
Loved EQ too. Played it for a while, but concurrent with WoW, I was playing both at the same time.
Yeah. Well, and then that starts to get crazy. Like we ended up doing we did betas for Rift, we did beta for Arcage, a bunch of stuff. And the problem with that was usually we would have good chunks of a guild would transit like, hey, let's all check out Arcage, or and then you didn't feel like you were shorting anybody by dividing your time, kind of thing.
Right.
Because we ran into it a little bit where it was like, all right, so are we logging on to this? Because I got a text for the thing, and it just became really involved.
Yep. Yeah, a big part of the core of my team, we've been together for almost 18 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
It's like having another family.
Yeah.
So it's weird.
Yeah. People, I always think it's funny. So some of those people I still talk to a little bit here and there, or some of my in-laws, we were all together with my wife and everything in the guild. And like some of them, I still don't know their actual names. Like I call them
by their game names,
screen name, and
right.
And my wife and I will talk about that, like, oh, Crusher, this, that, and the other,
right.
And I'll have family or whatever, like, what the hell are you talking about? And I'm like, oh, that's not his actual name. I don't actually know his name, but she knows who I'm talking about. That's, yeah,
Right. You just alienated half your audience, by the way.
that's totally fine. I don't care. That's
They're like, what are you calling reptile nerds? These guys are gaming nerds. That's even worse.
right. Yeah.
Actually, I see that as a badge of honor, the reptile nerd and the gaming nerd. I'm totally fine with that. I'm very happy with that. Anybody that puts that label on me, good. That's good. That's what I always.
People don't understand it, like especially with somebody like yourself, where you talk about like really long-term dedication to something. Like, wow, what's the difference? Are you good at research?
Oh yeah.
You read lore. Oh, you read lore about frogs written by a French guy, so now it's special instead of lore written about orcs. Like, it's the same thing. Like,
it is the same thing.
You're into it. There are little nuances and intricacies, and you want to know about them. And then you end up reading a story about some stupid elf or whatever. What's the difference between I don't actually keep newts and I own the Bengal Monitor book. I don't have those. Like, it's the exact same mentality that would drive you to those things.
Yeah. Yeah. When I was a kid, I was reading as much reptile books as I was reading like Elric and Conan and stuff like that. And that's, I think, why those MMO games hit me so hard, because here was a chance to go play inside that kind of a world, and it was like super, super engaging. And so, I mean, honestly, I think the only thing that matters, man, is that do stuff you love. Don't waste your time doing stuff that you don't love. And it'll work out. I don't think I think everybody can do that. I just think that, you got to get rid of the background noise that tells you that, no, you can't do this. Oh, you're not good enough. Oh, trust me, if a scrappy high school dropout, pissed off punk rock kid that comes from a very lower working class background can do what I've accomplished so far, then literally anybody can do it. There's nothing special about, I just went out and did stuff. So that's pretty much it.
I think that is an epic place to end the episode. That was awesome. And it very much sums up all the things that you've talked about for the last over 2 hours. That was awesome.
Sorry, man.
No, I'm totally serious. Like, it's weird because I'm a grown dude with white in my beard, but I'm a fan of that stuff. I'm a nerd for reptiles. Like, I've been involved in this since I was 10, like, and you're one of the names that I've always known. And like that, all the things that you are saying are very fitting with all the things that I've heard and seen. And yeah, I mean, that's exactly how I saw it happen and what I thought was happening. And then that confirms it, that you just made it work, man. That's fantastic.
Thanks, man. I appreciate that.
Absolutely. All right. Well, I will wrap it up, and I really appreciate you coming on.
You bet, man. Anytime.
All right. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you.
Night.
Night.
All right. That was episode 47. That was fantastic. Thank you to the folks hanging out in the chat, putting out questions, really specific questions that were awesome, especially considering of all the outdoor keeping aspects. That's some really cool stuff in there. As always, part of the Herpetoculture Network, and up at the top there by my clock, Black Box Cages folks. They are running some really cool stuff here toward the end of the year. And for Herpetoculture Network, they are going to have, I will also be involved in that show, are going to have the Person of the Year show. And each show on the network will do a Person of the Year. And then the network as a whole has a person that the 5 of us all selected. Everybody else already had a Person of the Year planned. And when we had our meeting, I did not, because I was not prepared. I do now, and I'm not going to tell any of you, so you'll actually turn into that episode. And then I have one more episode to finish the year, which will be in 2 weeks' time. And then transitioning into the new year, I don't have any episodes planned currently. They got a lot of weird work stuff going on. So I have things scheduled and planned. I just have one more to go for the end of this year scheduled. So I will see you guys all again in 2 weeks. Later.